All right, let's go to the Miami Dolphins. They're at man. As I was looking through their stuff, they're in a tough spot, right? Because
Yeah.
I think they have they were the team that went for it a couple years ago before the 2022 season. They trade for Tyreek Hill. They trade for Jalen Ramsey, right? They were the go for it team, right? They were the team that made the flashiest moves, and they worked, right? They worked theoretically. Not like they didn't win a Super Bowl, they didn't win a division, but they worked in the sense that the offense got turned around and they became a competitive playoff caliber team. At least when their starting quarterback has been healthy, right? So it worked in that sense. Where it doesn't work is okay. We're at the spot where the depth issues are up and down the roster: O line, D line, receiver three, all over the place. So you're dealing with plus two has been paid now, right? They went for it on the first contract for Tua. Now he's been paid. So now you're dealing with okay, how do we fix a lot more issues maybe than we had 3 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, like, so you went into this, and I'm like, okay, your first issue is like you had the stuff that happened with Tyreek Hill immediately after the end of the season, where he's like, I'm out of here, and now he's like, no, I was just emotional, I'm okay, but either way, you're dealing with an aging Tyreek Hill who's shown frustration that things have not been working out well. That's at least a conversation internally and a discussion and a figuring out of what are we doing with Tyreek, what are we doing with that whole world. Then you've got an offensive line, all of those Shanahan teams, right? The teams that for years had been able to mask bad offensive lines on paper. Well, it all like the bill became due for all of them last year. Houston, Miami, San Francisco, each one of them dealt with varying degrees of offensive line problems, which undermined everything they were trying to do on offense. Miami now goes into a season again with a bad looking offensive line on paper that needs serious remedial work. But then, so I think those are the sort of two acute, issues to address. But then you look at the rest of the roster, and my overwhelming impression was just like, what are we doing? Like, what is this? This is just a collection of some guys that is miles away from contending, apparently. And I don't know what the approach is. Like, I don't know what is the direction we're heading in. It's like you said, they made a bunch of aggressive moves. It hasn't worked out in that, Tua got hurt, the things have stalled generally, and now they don't feel any closer to contending than they were at the start of this whole process.
So remember how we compared them to the Cowboys a couple years ago, where they were a good team, they were a flashy team that put up a lot of points, beat up on bad teams, but didn't beat good teams. I don't know what the final record was, but over the last 2 years, there was whether 3-10 or 2-10 against teams with winning records. I don't know how you solve that, but I do feel like Miami's going to come back and reset and kind of go this old school football mentality. We need to be able to run the ball and stop the run in these good games and against these better teams. And I do wonder if it's a similar analysis to Dallas, where they spend the year resetting. And I do believe Philly winning in their annual investment in the offensive and defensive line is going to influence teams. I really do. I mean, it's old school football adages, but we know what happens as soon as a team wins the Super Bowl. It's like that's it. That's the way to do it. And Miami was already probably dealing with these issues. I think it's both lines this offseason because they went the other way, man. Right? They went with the shiny objects. They went Tyreek Hill. They went Jalen Ramsey. They went all the perimeter players, and it got them to a point, but the foundation wasn't strong enough. And I do believe it's time to get back to some of the foundation building for the Dolphins.
But this is the thing is that they've kind of lurched from one thing to the other. Like they also invested in the defensive front as well, albeit in a different way. I mean, they made the move for Bradley Chubb. That was a needle mover. Jalen Phillips is a first rounder. Chop Robinson is a high draft pick. Like they've invested in it, but then they let guys like Christian Wilkins walk in free agency rather than pay him. So they threw money at one and they've invested in the other in a different way. But you're still sort of, but like you just come back to like, even though they've had all this investment in various areas, like Calais Campbell might have been their best defensive player, and he's ancient and is presumably leaving in free agency. Zach Sealer is their other best defensive player, and he's just the guy that they stumbled upon during the course of general roster construction. Jalen Phillips is a good player. Chop Robinson is a good player, but you still look at the defensive line, you're like, this thing still needs certainly some depth issues. Linebacker is a mess. They don't have a safety right now. Like they're basically all hitting free agency. and cornerback is Jalen Ramsey, and then everything else is a question mark. So offense is relatively set, other than the fact that the offensive line is extremely weak on paper, but the whole defense is like in transition.
With 15 million over the cap, have 10 draft picks at least. A lot of them late in the draft, but 3 in the top 100, so that's good. And so there's look. I think remember they hit a stretch where they didn't draft a ton, and so I think those things are adding up, right? They didn't have a ton of draft picks over a few year period, and then they had gave up. Part of that was giving up picks to go get Tyreek and Ramsey and the whole thing, losing a first rounder and the whole deal. It's a get younger type of season for the Dolphins, which isn't a write-off, but it's a build through the draft time. They got pick 13, they have pick 48. Another team, I think, offensive and defensive linemen available there at 13, especially defensive line could be a way to go there. But as you say, they've got many spots to fill. So I think when we talk about the O-line, Kevin Zeitler, the 1-year flyer on him, and a lot of these are 1-year fixes to buy you time to build everything else, because you can't whack-a-mole the entire thing in 1 year. I think Kevin Zeitler would be a nice fit if they could get him down there. James Daniels at guard as a buy low. Aaron Banks is a free agent coming from the Niners, has the scheme familiarity, of course, played for Mike McDaniel before. I think those guys are all solid starters that could at least help on one of the spots there for the Dolphins. And then draft-wise, Tyler Booker, is he in play at as high as 13 as the best guard in the draft, or Amon Membu from Missouri, who's got tackle guard versatility?
Well, that also might be a really nice landing spot if, we talked before about how I've never seen a tackle class before where all of the top guys, the word guard is associated with them somewhere pretty high up, right? When you look at profiles or rankings or whatever, the Dolphins might end up being the beneficiary of something like that. Like if not enough teams think that a Kelvin Banks can play tackle, he might be sitting there at 13 for Miami to pounce on as a guard and say, we don't care if he can play tackle. If he can play right tackle, we can put him there because, Austin Jackson has not been good, but we also need guards desperately. So that versatility is actually a plus for them.
I love that suggestion, Sam, because you also have Teron Armstead at left tackle. I know they drafted Patrick Paul in the second round last year, kind of struggled as a rookie when he needed to step in, but Teron Armstead, great when he's out there, always a health concern. I saw some rumors that maybe he was going to be a cut candidate. Like, I can't see the Dolphins. I can't see them wanting to do that just because it's just another, like, where are you going to find the next left tackle? But Kelvin Banks might give you that future left tackle security and that early guard play. I actually love that as a potential fit for the Dolphins at 13.
Yeah, and I think the same thing is true with Will Campbell, though I think he's less likely to be the guy that slides. But same idea, right? If the teams don't think that he can play left tackle and he's seen as a guard, and that's the kind of thing that can drop you from a top 5 type of draft pick to the 10 to 15 range.
As far as the safeties go, I feel like that's the last thing I want to address. The way the safety market has gone. The Kevin Byards, Justin Simmons didn't really have a good year, but there are starting caliber safeties who get cut late. They signed for 1 year, $6 million. I mean, I think they're going to have to play that game. Javon Holland, they're not going to franchise tag him, let him hit the market, which is probably the right move. I'm not going to spend a ton of money at safety. So it doesn't feel great, but you're probably going to have to play cut down game and second wave there as far as safety goes.
I mean, I think not that it's easy, but I think there's going to be a ton of value in the safety market this season for teams. I mean, you can get guys, like a Julian Blackmon or a Cameron Bynum from Minnesota. Like these are going to be guys I think that sign for very modest contracts just because there's such a glut of availability. So even though Miami doesn't have much money to spend, they can presumably find that kind of deal. I mean, Justin Simmons is going to end up being a free agent again. Maybe, okay, he had a bad year in Atlanta, but this is a guy that's very not far removed from being one of the best safeties in the league.
Going back to the defensive line as well. Remember last year at this time, Christian Wilkins walks. Zach Sealer is the only guy with not only experience, but just good play. As you mentioned, they added Calais Campbell late. He's a Miami guy. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that one more time and steal another 1 year, $2 million contract out of Calais Campbell just because he's from the area. If you can, great. But that interior defensive line absolutely needs to be addressed. Once again, deep defensive line class. This feels like a world where they could maybe double up at that position in the draft. So I could see a guard tackle, 2 defensive tackles, even with their first 3 picks, and feel pretty good about that. I think as far as reshaping where this roster is going.
I mean, if Calais Campbell wants to play one more year, I would do that without hesitation for them.
Yeah, guys pushing our age and still playing. Remember, he wanted to maybe get released and go chase a ring late. I don't know if he's going to see the Dolphins as the ring chasers. Again, culturally, I'm really interested in where this thing shifts. You're right. Like Tyreek Hill, I think can still play, but he's not the type that ages gracefully, I don't think, because of how dependent he is on speed and quicks. So at some point, are you going to reshape this from like the flashy throw the ball, not even outside the numbers, but throw the ball to your receivers a ton? And there was a lot of games last year where they started to pivot, right? The Jonnu Smith games, they're throwing over the middle of the field. They're mixing it up. I do wonder how much they're going to try to, how do we get over the hump against good teams, win with the run, stop the run, do a little bit more inside out than maybe they have, especially offensively, right? Over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be fascinating generally to see what that scheme starts to look like, because you've got the fact that it has the potency of it seems to have worn off, but you've also, that was the landing spot for our friend Bobby Slowik, fired as offense coordinator from the Texans. He reunites with Mike McDaniel in Miami as 2 guys that worked together under Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. I mean, that's an intriguing landing spot for him as well. So you've now got, multiple minds from that Shanahan system all working to try and figure out how to get this thing back on track.
All right, man. Have we fixed the Miami Dolphins?
I mean, a little bit.
Trench warfare up front. We got this. Guard tackle, couple defensive tackles, second wave of safety free agency, second wave of offensive line free agency to reshape that thing. I think we're moving in the right direction. They don't have to sign Morgan Moses, though.
I mean, they could.
They could. They always could.
He's better than Austin Jackson.
That's true. He is an upgrade over most.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.